USC stars looking for a future in the NFL. We will track their progress at the NFL Combine this week. And of course, so many changes across college football to the entire landscape of the sport and how it impacts USC. Right here on Trojan's Conquest Live, right here at the Voice of College Football. We appreciate you stopping by. Leave those comments and questions there. Consider a super chat contribution as well. Matt Zemek's here from Trojan's Wire. Tim cannot make it tonight. Tim Prangley does such an outstanding job with all that we do here on the USC channel at the Voice of College Football. So we hope all is good with Tim and family. Matt, how you doing tonight?
Doing okay. No, I mean, I've talked with Tim behind the scenes. He's had a complicated month of February. Let's just put it that way. He's dealing with a lot of stuff, so he needs that time with family. Definitely want to support him. And, just to be transparent about this, in March, there are going to be some times where I'm going to have to duck out of the show for March Madness, and Tim's going to be able to step in for me. So it's kind of appropriate. I get to fill in for him now. Kind of works out well that way, and then he can fill in for me in March. So that's the larger grand economy of things here at the Voice of College Football.
One of the big advantages of having three of us get together each week, which it's always nice when all three can get together. We typically are able to pull that off, but if not, for a long, long time, it was just Matt and myself. So now we've got Tim on board, and we're glad and we're better for it as well. Before we get to just isolated USC content, the decision made in a federal court in Tennessee and in Virginia last week just completely takes the lid off the NIL situation concerning inducements, because I think with all the confusion out there, Matt, and all the various thoughts about what the guidelines are, what they were supposed to be, what NIL was supposed to be, and how it was supposed to operate, I think the one, based on my conversations with fans, and based on my own personal preference, I think that a lot of people, and I will include myself, and sometimes you have to separate what should be legal or what is legal and what is ethical versus just what your preference would be. I would love the sport to go back to 1985. However, there should be a lot of things involved that as American citizens, that these athletes should have a right to partake in. And NIL is, of course, at the forefront. So I'm getting to inducements. And inducements, it's almost like a speed limit, although most of us felt as though, okay, 9 out of 10 are getting away with the inducements. At least we felt safe and secure to a certain extent that at least the guidelines were there, that if things were done above board, that these schools were still attracting athletes based on their championship pedigree, based on their NFL development, based on actual academics. All of those things were still in play. And then the NIL was there, but then the specifics were dealt with after the players signed and enrolled and all of that. But number one, we know that wasn't always the case, that there were inducements. But now, after that ruling, at least in those two states, and we expect it to, of course, expand past those two states nationally, that inducements, there is nothing legally wrong with inducing an athlete, alluring them, attracting them based on the NIL collective.
Yeah, and so, USC folks, people who followed the program, I mean, if Tim was here, he would be saying what I'm about to say too, is that, because of all the theater of Reggie Bush and the NCAA and Paula D and Todd McNair and all the things that went down when, Pete Carroll went off to the NFL and the NCAA really railroaded the Trojans and really, held the USC to a different standard compared to a lot of other programs out there, whether it was Auburn, Florida, other programs that were also in the midst of, similar controversies that were not, extraordinarily different, some nuanced differences, sure. But in terms of the fundamental nuts and bolts wasn't, all that different from what went on at USC, but yet the NCAA pounced on USC. So there has been an understandable reticence within the USC administration, among USC leaders, we don't want to, court the gray areas here, because then the NCAA could come back to us with a vengeance, and we have to go through this exhausting period, and we might have to fight another uphill battle, which we definitely don't want. The scars are still there from 13, 14 years ago. And so USC and Jen Cohen and President Carol Folt, they've really been very intentional, and they've been very public and straightforward about, we want to do this the right way. We do not want to be a renegade, an outlaw. And so this is really interesting, right? Because now USC should not live in the same amount or degree of fear that the NCAA is going to come bringing the hammer, bringing scrutiny. Now everything's out in the open. There should ostensibly, one would think, be a lot more freedom in terms of making an aggressive run at recruits. And one of the other specific things to note here for USC is that, it's not as though recruiting's been problematic at all positions. Like USC getting quarterbacks, getting guys in the portal, and because of Lincoln Riley, of course, prime quarterbacks, receivers, they will want to play in a Lincoln Riley offense because they know that's NFL quality development. What's lagged behind has been, of course, the defensive side of the ball, and also most centrally line play. And one of the big droughts, struggles, continuing points of failure for USC over the past several years, of course, with deep roots in the Clay Helton reign of error, has been the inability to consistently bring in 5-star offensive linemen, 5-star offensive tackles. And so you would think that within this new landscape of NIL, where it's now truly the wild, wild west, I wouldn't expect USC to just, fling the doors open and be, go crazy everywhere. But you would think that there's going to be some specific targeted conversations between Lincoln Riley, between Jen Cohen, and between and among boosters and relevant power players near the program who care about the program. All right, how do we now make our move for elite offensive tackles, also elite defensive tackles? If USC can just beef up those two positions and start getting the really big 5-star fish in the sea at those two positions, this program could take off. So it's not as though you have to do this for all positions. If USC can just make more of an effort there at those two spots, and if Jen Cohen can have the right conversations with the right people, USC could make significant advancements. So I don't think the whole modus operandi at USC is suddenly going to change. Carol Folt still wants this ship to be run properly. Let's keep in mind that Mike Bone was not entirely professional in the way he did his job. It wasn't so much about fundraising specifically, but his in-office conduct was poor. So that was another black eye for USC in terms of just how professional a shop the Trojans had. So there's still that mindfulness of wanting to do things right. Let's remember that when there was speculation about Urban Meyer coming in as the replacement for Clay Helton, Carol Folt shot that down. I don't want Urban Meyer. I don't want the circus, the carnival that comes with him. Carol Folt rightly doesn't want this thing to be a freak show at USC. She wants a certain structure and integrity. So that's going to still be there. But obviously, USC needs to be more aggressive so that it can compete with Phil Knight's Oregon money, and it can compete with Ohio State and the robust investment that the Buckeyes have made in the NIL space. I mean, Oregon and Ohio State are now both in the same conference as USC in football. So the Trojans have to start winning more battles with those two programs. That's just the reality in terms of what USC needs to achieve if it wants to go to the top. And of course, that's the goal, to be at the top, certainly to make the 12-team playoff. I mean, if USC is missing that 12-team playoff with any degree of consistency, that's a pretty bad failure. Maybe not for this year, because it might be a little bit, USC might be caught a little bit in between, but certainly going forward, 12-team playoff should be an annual expectation at USC, no bones about it. And if the lack of 5-star offensive linemen and 5-star defensive tackles consistently, repeatedly, continuously prevents USC from making that 12-team playoff, well, we're going to look at right now and say, where was the leadership? Where were the right people? Where were the right conversations? Why did this project not get moved forward? So, like, that is the foremost job for Jen Cohen right now as the one who's steering the big ship of USC athletics, USC football on this macro level at the 40,000-foot view. She needs to be having the right conversations in terms of how do we move this thing forward more aggressively, still playing with some using some guardrails and using some common sense principles, but being able to push ahead. There's no question that the NIL effort needs to be more vigorous, more targeted, and produce, of course, bigger results.
Matt, here's an angle to it that I'm going to throw your way concerning the offensive line and both the acquisition of offensive linemen and the development of offensive line. Because when Lincoln Riley was at Oklahoma, they won a Joe Moore Award. They also had other offensive lines that were in the finalist category grouping for the Joe Moore Award. So they had excellent offensive line play. Now, how much of that was produced by the offensive line coach, which I believe was Bill Biedenbaugh at the time, how much of that was produced and could be given credit by just flat out recruiting and signing talent? I'd have to go back and look at those lists of players. They've certainly marched many of them onto the NFL, and how much of it was, the combination of all those things. But you would think that there would be a certain attraction and a certain advantage to recruiting to this offense, even for offensive linemen, because there being some cachet that you're blocking for All-American quarterbacks. And you're connected, you're attached at the hip, and your name is on that same line, included in those same promotions and so forth that connect you to being part of the reason why you're gaining so much yardage and making guys like Caleb Williams star players.
You would think that, and I think the interesting question you bring up indirectly, because yes, why wouldn't you as an offensive line prospect want to play in a Lincoln Riley offense? You're getting, you're being exposed to, a sophisticated, successful system, and you have a lot of, X and O know-how on offense if you're playing for Lincoln Riley. The question that we'll never really know is, how would USC be faring in the realm of offensive line recruiting right now if the Trojans had gone 10-2 or 11-1 last season? It's really hard for me to shake the notion that, because this season was so bad, this 2023 season was so bad. Lincoln Riley, he had never lost more than 2 games in a regular season as a head coach before, and then he loses 5. So that was a dramatic fall for Lincoln Riley just within the course of one season. I'm not talking about his career. I'm just talking about, in terms of the trajectory he had in last season in particular. How much damage did that do? And it wasn't just the losing either. It was, USC lost all of its high-profile games in the second half of the season, from Notre Dame on through the finale against UCLA. Lost all the really big games on its schedule, usually got punched in the mouth. Alex Grinch made USC a laughingstock on defense. And, Lincoln Riley, he adjusted to it. Like, he finally had the scales removed from his eyes, saw on the road to Damascus. He finally had that epiphany. And it's good that he did. And it looks like it's going to have USC in really good shape for the future. But in terms of your point, Mark, about offensive linemen, elite offensive tackles, the 5 stars not coming to USC, you have to wonder how much the 2023 season affected that. And of course, some people will say, well, hey, if you saw USC's offensive line getting punched in the mouth at Notre Dame, that would tell some recruits, oh, I can step in and immediately play. But I think that the perception that USC was a soft program, a soft team, and a program that really didn't take winning nearly as seriously as it could have or should have last year. I mean, that was a perception, and it was certainly a valid one just within the contours of last season specifically. I'm not talking beyond that, but in 2023, there was a narrative, and it was hard to really refute, that USC wasn't taking winning or physicality very seriously. It was a finesse team that just got punched in the teeth, didn't fight back, and you have to wonder how much residual damage that perception created for offensive lineman prospects.
Of course, USC came within one failed 2-point conversion from having what we could call a perfect asymmetrical season. 6-0, 0-6 is what it could have been, very easily. I'd like to address the comment made by our buddy Jeff Rodriguez. And Jeff, we appreciate you being here every week. Thank you for that. High 4-star offensive tackles versus 5-star tackles. O-line is very hard to evaluate. If you look at the best ones in the draft, most aren't 5 stars. So here's my thought on this one, Jeff, without, again, doing any research to back this up completely. But consider this. Are there more 4 stars in the NFL than 5 stars? You know what the answer is? Yes. But what is the higher percentage by far of players from that category in the NFL? So follow me here. There are only 30 to 35 5 stars produced each year out of high school football. If you go to ESPN, Rivals, 247 Sports, On3, any of the listings, which usually produce a top 300 list, go all the way to number 300. That player is still a 4-star. You've got to go about 400 to 450 deep to run out of 4 stars. There are about 10 times more than that, 11, 12 times as many 4 stars as 5 stars. And of course, I'm talking about all positions here. So again, I'm not saying that this is completely incorrect and that you're not onto something, Jeff, but just consider that there are only 30 or 35 5 stars produced out of high school football each year. And there are about 400 4 stars. About 40 to 45% are the numbers that I've seen recently of 5 stars reach the NFL, and only about 12 to 14% 4 stars. So there are going to be more 4 stars and 3 stars in the NFL because there are just simply hundreds and hundreds of them versus only a small selection of 5 stars.
Yeah, I mean, Jeff brings up a really good point, and Mark, you obviously bring up a really good point about, just 4 stars. It's a much deeper pool. It's a much larger volume of players. So just in terms of a numbers game, there will be more 4 stars. And Jeff, your point's well made about the complexity of evaluation. And obviously, another part of this is Josh Henson. That, whatever Josh Henson is doing, he needs to be developing players to a 5-star level. Like if guys come in at a 3 or a 4-star level, but Henson can turn them into basically 5-star quality, NFL quality, then, this conversation doesn't contain the amount of weight that it currently does. But of course, in 2023, we did not see Josh Henson develop his offensive line to a 5-star level. So in many ways, it's like these things are interwoven, Jeff. I mean, again, your point's an excellent one. But if we know that Josh Henson is an elite home run rock star developer, then we don't have to sweat this 4-star, 5-star question. But if Josh Henson is not the best of the best, and we've mentioned this point a lot, we're going to continue to mention it throughout the year, throughout the summer, certainly heading up to the LSU opener in Las Vegas on Labor Day weekend. But this is a prove-it year for Josh Henson, and I really do think he's the most important assistant on this whole staff, that if he nails it, USC is going to have a great year. If he fails it, USC is going to be in for a real struggle because, I'm just in love, platonically, of course, with this defensive coaching staff. Like, how can you not love any of the guys that Lincoln Riley's brought in on the defensive side of the ball? And you have Lincoln Riley calling plays. So, all that's really good. You need to find a new running back coach, but like, USC's running backs are not something that I stay up, losing sleep about at night. It's that offensive line. If it protects Miller Moss, who, played that amazing Holiday Bowl, but one game does not a superstar make. We need to see consistency from that. And of course, against LSU, we need to see Miller Moss getting a clean pocket, getting as much time as he needs to survey that defense and to have a comfortable game so that, week one pressures and uncertainties don't fall too heavily on his shoulder. Over the course of a full season, you need your quarterback to be really good at making improvisational plays and identifications. In week one, boy, you need structure and you need stability around your quarterback. So that goes right to the offensive line. And given how important that LSU game is, if USC does beat LSU, I think they're going to go 10-2 and make the playoff. If they don't, it's going to be a real uphill battle because they're going to Michigan and they have other challenges in the schedule, such as Notre Dame and also at Washington and Seattle. If they beat LSU, I think the leverage USC has is going to be significant. And how do you win that LSU game? You give Miller Moss comfort and reliability, and you have what you saw in the Holiday Bowl, 10 teammates going to battle, picking up their teammate, putting him in the best position to succeed. So all of this comes back to, if Josh Henson is the real deal, and I think 2024 is going to show us, then that tension between 4 and 5 stars, that melts away a little bit. But because we don't know that yet, right now, that notion that USC needs to upgrade the average level of talent, the average level and quality of prospect that it brings in the door, that's more relevant right now. Josh Henson can make that point less relevant, but right now it's an uncertain thing. And so having those higher leverage, higher rated prospects and getting more depth of them, that's a relevant thing. And of course, I'm no recruiting expert. I don't follow recruiting really intensively. Like, it's not my game. I come for following football on Saturdays and the game management situations and the history and romance of the sport. Like, those are my sweet spots, as Mark knows well. But I know this about recruiting, that the essential point about 5 stars is not the individual 5-star that you get. It's that if you get so many 5 stars in the room, some of them are going to hit. If you're able to land a lot of excellent players, some of them are going to come through for you. And so if you have 5 stars coming through for you and delivering, that's better than 4 stars coming through for you and delivering, because you're going to get a higher ceiling of performance from the ones that hit. And as soon as you develop some kind of track record, as soon as you crack open that door and you start to land some 5 stars, and they begin to hit and they begin to elevate your program and its ceiling, you create a narrative, you create a reputation. Oh, the 5-star linemen are back at USC. It's 1979 all over again, baby. We're going to just go smash mouth. We're going to stuff it in Ohio State's face on the final drive of the Rose Bowl behind Anthony Munoz and all those other rock stars up front. Student body right. And then you don't just have a program that's succeeding. You have a culture. You have an identity. You have, as the kids like to say today, a vibe. And so, that's part of the thing with 5 stars. It's not just, 4 stars might be more represented in the NFL draft, as Jeff says. And again, Jeff, it's a really good point that you make. But because Josh Henson is not the proven, firm, obvious, clear-cut answer at offensive line coach, that's the uncertainty which elevates the centrality of needing to get more 5 stars into the program at USC.
And Jeff, I was not disagreeing with you, and I appreciate you following up and letting me know that you generally agree with me. But I was not disagreeing with you, Jeff. I was just letting everyone know, including yourself, and you probably already took this into account, but just letting everyone know, let's understand that there are just simply more 4 stars in the NFL at every position, including offensive line. But I completely agree with you. It's a developmental position more so than any other position, by and large, no question about it. All right. We do appreciate y'all being here each and every Monday night. This is the new time that you're going to see us each and every Monday. So it's just 1 hour earlier for everyone. So that's 7 o'clock Eastern time on the West Coast. That's 10 o'clock Eastern on the East Coast, 10 Eastern, 7 Pacific. This is a new start time for us each and every Monday with Matt, Tim, and myself talking USC football. All right, we want to move on to the playoff structure and what it's going to look like going forward. Of course, with a Pac-12 conference, there was a playoff proposal that was agreed upon and going to be implemented that had to be tweaked somewhat with only 4 power conferences going forward. So, Matt, kind of a two-part question because we got the 12-team playoff starting, of course, and it was finalized in regards to that the top 5 conference champions, which we would assume is definitely going to be the 4 power conferences, and then the top conference champion will get an automatic bid, not a bye, but an automatic bid, which will be your top group of 5 team. And so it sets up with the 4 byes of the 4 conference champions and a 12-team playoff field. Folks, if you enjoy this kind of stuff, I just posted a video today with the 14-team playoff and what it would have looked like every season from 2014 through 2023, and some other topics that I'm going to hit Matt with here in just a second. But just your initial thoughts about the 12-team playoff with the slight adjustment.
I think the huge headline from that initial playoff plan, and of course, we're going to talk in a bit about, making it 14, making it 16. It's kind of curious how it's happening this way. Why is there all this noise about 14 or 16 right after, the supposed reports that like an ESPN deal for a 12-team playoff was, they were closing in on that 12-team playoff deal. But anyway, just looking at the 12-team format itself, the huge story is obvious. Notre Dame does not get a chance to have a first-round bye. Notre Dame will never be, under this format at least, Notre Dame cannot be one of the top 4 seeds. I'm stunned, Mark. I'm stunned. I mean, I thought Notre Dame had enough clout in the room to insist on getting, preferred placement, one of those executive seats at the table. I'm really surprised. And I mean, and I know that the other factions, the other sources of power in college football, most centrally the SEC, they don't like Notre Dame's independence and they would prefer that Notre Dame be in a conference. But I didn't imagine that they would have so much leverage that they could push through a plan that would essentially punish Notre Dame for not being in a conference. But that seems to be what it amounts to, unless someone has a better explanation. Like, I thought Notre Dame would not stand for that kind of plan. I thought Notre Dame would be in competition to be able to get a top 4 seed in a first round bye under this format, but it doesn't seem as though that happened, and that just really surprises me. I thought Notre Dame had more muscle, more clout to get this thing through. Let's remember, Notre Dame is the reason that Cal and Stanford are in the ACC. Like, Notre Dame was a driver of that. And I mean, like, that's not like, it affects Notre Dame, but it's not like an existential question for Notre Dame either. Like, the Irish did not have to stick their necks out to the extent that they did. And, so Notre Dame not getting that preferred placement, that preferred seat at the table, I am really surprised. Not slightly, profoundly surprised at all that and how it went down.
I got to say, I was not surprised, nor would I have been surprised had they been able to pull that off. I didn't really see that one way or the other in regards to that taking me off guard. This is what I'm reading into the next phase of this and what could propel into a 14-team playoff or a 16-team playoff, but 14 is the one that's being talked about and is out there right now. Here's my theory, Matt. It's a 2-part theory. So Tony Petitti, Big Ten commissioner, came out last week. He was interviewed by ESPN, and he made 2 statements. He basically said, we, of course, and this is no revelation to anyone, every conference commissioner wants to achieve this goal, but he put it out there as this is our goal, to get as many teams in the playoffs as possible. But then he also said, we want to play as many meaningful games in November as possible. So my initial thought was, those two goals are great goals to have, but they run contradictory to each other in this way. You're trying to get as many teams into the playoff. And if there's one thing that the playoff committee proved over the 10-year 4-team playoff until that Florida State example, and you could tie that to Jordan Travis and all the sorts of things, but they never jumped a inferior record over a better record. Meaning, for as much as we thought that the SEC got preferential treatment, which they did and which they earned in previous seasons because of their playoff performance, the playoff committee always stayed in order. Now, they did have to break ties, 2 12-1 teams, 2 11-1 teams, whatever the case might be. They did have to break ties, of course, because they only had 4 spots, but they never leaped a Power 5 team over another one that had a worse record. They never did that. So they always stayed in order. So my thought initially was, well, Tony, it's going to be difficult to achieve these two objectives at the same time, because you're telling us that what you want is you want your best teams in the Big Ten to be playing in November. So that's going to suppress records. That's going to drive up TV ratings and interest in the sport and interest in the games, but it's going to suppress the records. However, what happened then? So I thought, this is contradictory. So I'm waiting for the next shoe to fall, the next statement, the next thrust. Well, it came in 2 waves. Number one was, we want 4 guaranteed spots. So regardless of what our records are, we can dive down into the 9-3 level. We are pushing for 4 guaranteed spots because we are just that good. So I thought, okay, well, that took care of my first question. And then the second one, Matt, was we want to go to a 14-team playoff. Well, what does a 14-team playoff do? It focuses a lot of people on, well, number 13 and number 14. It's allowing 2 other teams into it. And that's all well and good. And that's part of the process and the most obvious. But we're focusing on the wrong end of the spectrum. Those teams are pretty inconsequential. You'll have a Tennessee and a Washington in the playoff, or a Penn State and a Texas A&M, or whoever, and they most likely won't make a deep run in the playoffs. Focus on the 2 top spots. So instead of having 4 byes, where you most likely will have a Big Ten champ that's going to be one of the 2 or 3 best teams in the country, and an SEC champ that's going to be number 2 or 3 in the country, have to share byes with a Utah or an Arizona or a Florida State, who might be number 11 in the country, but they won their conference, and Ohio State or USC sitting at 11-1, but a non-conference champion, or 11-2 after losing a conference championship game, get propelled past, even though they're higher in the rankings, by what we've seen. All you have to do is run the numbers and run the models of the 10-team playoff and look at what the ACC and the Big 12, and especially the new ACC and the new Big 12, would be producing. A lot of fringe top 10 teams would be receiving byes, except if the Big 10 and the SEC get a 14-team playoff, then there's only 2 byes and 2 number 1 seeds, and they're almost assuredly going to go to the SEC and the Big 10 and back to the back of the line for the Big 12 and the ACC.
That's really well stated, and it's really well formulated. The thing that mystifies me, why 14 teams would be such a conversation point. I mean, now you've answered this, but like, if you're going to go past 12, wouldn't you then want to just go to 16? Like, I mean, just in terms of bracketing, right? Just in terms of structuring your tournament, isn't the easiest solution to go to 16 rather than 14? 14 is an in-between number. 12, it's pretty clear cut. Top 4 byes, 5, 12. 6-11, basically like an NCAA tournament bracket, right? Everyone can grasp it. It's really easy. Why not just go to 16 with the extra inventory? I mean, so why would you have to, settle on 14 when you can just, hey, let's just go to 16? Because, in the year of the 14 playoff era, we were saying, this is gonna go to at least 8. All right. And so like they bypassed 8 and went to 12. Let's just get it over with and go to 16. Right. Because I can't see a 14-team playoff. I can see it existing, but I can't see it being the permanent way of doing things. Like I can see it existing for maybe a couple years, but there's going to be just too much more money. Come on, let's just go to 16.
I completely agree with everything you just stated, Matt, except for if the SEC and the Big Ten get their way, and I'm right about their motivation in wanting their best team to get a bye and no one else, then that might be enough to keep that 14-team playoff together for a while, possibly.
Yeah. And this is where we have to deal with the other item we haven't yet talked about. And that is, why was all this reportage about ESPN getting the exclusive playoff deal, for 12, and then suddenly there are leaks about 14 or 16. And I think the obvious underlying story there is, that ESPN would presumably be in a position to sub-license those extra games out. So like ESPN gets to say, oh, we're a benevolent figure. We're giving these other networks a playoff game. Look at how good we are. There seems to be kind of like a PR element here, a saving face element that, okay, we can't shut out everyone else entirely, but ESPN would still get almost all of the pie, and it would certainly get all of the big, high-end games at the end stage of the playoffs, the semifinals and championship games. I'm really interested in the politics of that and why, there was all this ESPN end game reportage, but then, the deal's not done, and 14, maybe 16. Just wondering what's going on behind that in terms of all the gears turning, because if it seemed like such a done deal with ESPN for the 12-team playoff, like what person, what power broker behind the scenes stepped in to say, wait a minute, we need a few more playoff games to sub-license out to other entities. Not that that's a bad idea, but like, just why wasn't that part of the process and the negotiations earlier? Why does it happen now only after it seemed to be the case that ESPN was getting the exclusive deal? Because let's be clear, I want different networks to be covering the playoff. I think it's a huge deal. I think it's vitally important for college football. We just saw it with Kirk Herbstreit and the way he, quote unquote, covered the playoff, the way he analyzed the playoff. I mean, he lost a lot of credibility in this business, in my mind, for the way he stumped for Alabama and talked down Florida State when no self-respecting college football analyst should have been taking that position. And this is not a point of debate. Undefeated Power 5 champion, you're in. You should be in, period. End of sentence. No qualifications or caveats or asterisks about your injury health. No, you earned that berth. I don't care if 10 guys go motorbiking and injure themselves before the playoff game. You still earn that playoff berth. And so Herbstreit, he's lost a ton of credibility with me, and it just reinforced the point that a lot of people have been saying for a long time, that ESPN's going to emphasize the matchups, teams that profit ESPN. So that ceases to be pure football analysis, and it becomes conflict of interest. It becomes, anti-competitive, monopolistic practice. We need other networks covering these games. So let me be clear on that. We need other networks covering these games. But just in terms of the politics, why did it take the reports of ESPN having the 12-team playoff contract in its entirety to suddenly create the idea that, we might sub-license some games. Some other networks might be let in the back door. We might need to expand the playoff field. Like, we don't know the deeper story here, and we need to know it, because that's a huge point of interest, not just for fans, but for coaches, administrators. Like, everyone needs to know this is going to be an above board process, and we're still in the shadows, Mark, of 2014, when you and I had not been talking then. We didn't know each other then. But in terms of what I was saying and writing at the places that employed me at the time, I was very clear. We need a spelled out list of criteria. Tell us what the number one criterion is. Tell us what the number two criterion is. 3, 4, 5. Lay it out. Be specific. Be exact. Be absolutely clear, so that no one can have any misapprehensions or misunderstandings of what it takes to get into a 4-team college football playoff. And of course, there was none of that. And we could all pretty much see what ESPN's game was. It was that you can just shift the goalposts, depending on which team it is, to suit your argument, to suit your commercial needs, to create, a first take style, angry crowd debate, just drive up the blood pressure. We don't want resolution. We want theater. That was ESPN's whole deal. And so all of that militates against your top 25 rankings that make sense. Your let's just evaluate the teams based on what they've done. Your emphasis on which teams have earned and deserve higher rankings, higher placement than others. Real, adult, serious, sincere college football analysis and evaluation. It's just about what they've done on the field against the competition that they've played. But ESPN having full control of the playoff, it has obviously not served that kind of fair evaluation process and a fair playoff outcome, as we saw with Florida State.
And to outline and to give even more weight to exactly what you're talking about with this Florida State situation, let's all consider this. Regardless of whether any of us, any of you out there believe that Florida State was one of the top 4 teams in the country, consider what the playoff committee did. And I don't pretend to know exactly how much influence ESPN has over that committee, but I know that there's influence. And so consider this, that Florida State lost Jordan Travis at the end of the North Alabama game, or sometime during the North Alabama game. So they go into their final rivalry week against Florida. Okay, they looked abysmal on offense, couldn't throw the ball for more than 50 yards against Florida, won the game by 9 points against a 5-7 team. They didn't move at all. They did not move an inch in the playoff rankings. They maintained their position at number 3. Okay, the following week, they still don't have their starting quarterback. They go to a third-string quarterback. They're playing Louisville. So let's consider what happened on this particular weekend. I believe Florida State was at 4, and Texas was at 7. They had a 3-spot advantage over Texas. Texas went out, won handily, albeit, but they played Oklahoma State, and I had the rankings in my head exact, of course, when the debate was hot, but I believe Oklahoma State was number 22 in the country, based on the committee's rankings, number 22 in the country. So number 7 beats number 22. Florida State's at number 4. They beat number, I believe, 14, Louisville. They beat them by 10 points. Not as dominating a win, but they're 3 spots higher. They beat a team ranked 8 spots higher, and they lose ground. And Texas, how does that make any sense? And my final point, Matt, would be that if you are going to die on the hill that they are a different team without Jordan Travis, and from a football analysis standpoint, I can back that up. I can take that as a reasonable argument that they are a different team. They're not a top 3 or 4 team in the country without Jordan Travis. However, you didn't reflect that the 2 previous weeks in your rankings, number 1. Number 2, they kept using the phrase, they are a completely different team, in quote. They are a completely well, if they're a completely different team, then rank them accurately. Are they now the 17th best team in the country, the 13th best team then put them there. If you truly believe, don't say they're number 5.
Yeah, exactly.
In a field that's stacked with like 8 teams that were that close. Oregon, Ohio State, all those teams were so close that if they were that decidedly different, then they should plummet.
My other point, not going to add to anything. I mean, not going to repeat anything you said, because all those points are perfect as they were. The other point to make is there is a million degrees of difference between a debate involving a 13-0 team and a 12-1 versus a 12-1 versus an 11-2. And like when we had those debates in like 2011, 2012, I remember I think LSU had 1 loss and Oregon had 2, something like that. Or, we had some of those kinds of debates. Actually, it might have been Oregon and Stanford. We had those kinds of debates like in the early 2010s. When you're going between a 12-1 team and an 11-2 team, the 11-2 team had more high-end wins than the 12-1 team. The 12-1 team did not do everything it could to merit playoff inclusion. But when you shift that to a 12-1 versus a 13-0, the 13-0 team made no mistakes. Perfect season. It did everything in its power. The 12-1 team did not. I can't emphasize enough that 12-1 versus 11-2, both teams left the door open for the other to leapfrog them. But 13-0, 12-1, it should be sacred in college football. I mean, I'm not talking about, a Northern Illinois, a MAC team, but like, in terms of the big boys, in terms of Power 5 conference football, you go 13-0 as a Power 5 team, you get in ahead of a 12-1 team. That should be a sacred, ironclad, bedrock, non-negotiable principle in college football. And it finally got violated, and that's why we had such an understandable firestorm about ESPN's role, Kirk Herbstreit's to talk, in the hours and days leading up to the moment. That's why it upset so many people, and people were right to be upset, Mark.
If we want an example of an undefeated football team that was precarious going into the football playoff, go to 2014 and that same Florida State program. They were 13-0, and they were squeaking by the likes of a Boston College and those sorts every week. Most football analysts did not believe that they were one of the 4 best teams in the country, but they were undefeated. So they got their spot in the 14 playoff. Sure, they got wiped out by 39 points by Oregon, but case in point, they earned the spot because they won the football games.
Although it should be noted, Florida State was seated lower than Alabama, and Alabama had a loss, and so Florida State gets shipped all the way out to Pasadena to play Oregon. Unfavorable placement. Instead of being able to stay, closer to home in the Sugar Bowl, Florida State gets sent out west for a less favorable matchup. So even then, in 2014, Florida State, unbeaten, was not really given the amount of respect it deserved and frankly earned.
And one reason why they were probably given entry into the playoff is because the option to replace them was TCU or Baylor, not a blue blood, not a brand. So there you go. We'll get to some of these comments here. Will, we appreciate you. Will, if you're listening to me right now, I got your Patreon membership. I will be sending back an email to you and a few things there. So thank you so much for that. Will says here, Matt, Notre Dame doesn't need a bye. It helps the Irish because they do not play the SEC or the Big Ten team in the first 2 rounds.
Well, Will, I would say that, I guess your point of emphasis would be, let's break that duck. Let's break that bagel and get a playoff win. And so as far as that goes, in terms of just getting Notre Dame getting a playoff win, that would help Notre Dame. But in terms of winning a national title, having to win 4 games instead of 3, that's just a tougher hill to climb. But in terms of getting a playoff win, sure, I'll go along with that.
So what Will's saying here as well, everyone, is that Notre Dame, if they're the number one team in the country, let's say, they're going to drop to a 5 seed. So they're the 5 seed, best case scenario. They play the 12. So they play the Liberty. They play the Boise State, whomever shows up. So that should be a win. They're playing on campus. And if it's not a win, then they're not worthy of it anyway. So they win that first playoff game. Then they are playing the 4 seed, who is most likely going to be a Big 12 or an ACC champion. So they're, for a second round, also avoiding the SEC and the Big 10 if things play out the way we anticipate. So good call there, Will. Slap Happy showing up. Fight on, ladies. SC. Slap Happy, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate your support as well. And Will backing up his previous comment by letting us know, yes, if the Irish go 12-0 in the regular season, we're right there with you, Will. Thank you so much for your support. And again, Will, I will get back to you. Jeff, thank you so much for the super sticker. Thank you so much, Jeff, and everyone for being here. We've got about 100 online. Thank you. We are in the it would not be a perfect analogy or correlation to the dog days of August for a baseball season. It didn't quite work out, but we're in the dead time. Let's face it. We are communicating and we're having our community here of hardcore college football fans. Absolutely. Absolutely. By the way, in a 14-team playoff, Clay Helton's 2016 and 17 teams would have made the playoff. That 16 team would have been number 9 in the playoff rankings. So you can't just go by the playoff rankings. It gets seeded differently based on who wins conferences and so forth, everyone. But in 2017, that team that lost eventually 3 games, but only 2, beat Stanford in the Pac-12 championship game. They would have been a 5 seed because they had a conference championship. So they would have been a 5 seed in 2017. Don't think based on how well that team played that they would have fared or hung around too long in the playoff. Then, of course, Lincoln Riley's 2022 team would have been 10th in the seeding process. All right, Matt. A lot of us are intrigued by the NFL draft and that connection between college football and the NFL. So some of you love the NFL. Some of you are a bit lukewarm, just maybe kick in after college is done and watch the playoffs. So we've got varying degrees of NFL fandom out there. I got to say that I have been a over-the-top huge NFL fan my entire life. I've cooled here a bit in the last 5 years or so, but I'm the guy that can sit up at 4:00 in the morning and watch playoff games from 1988 and on YouTube. I just can't get enough of the NFL throughout history. So we get that connection with the NFL draft, and of course, the forerunner is the NFL Combine. Everything, Matt, is before we get down to the details of USC's prospects, everything that the NFL touches turns to gold. And this is a prime example. Who would have thought, pick your year, in 1985, that much like the NFL draft, some of the old codgers back in the day when it was more of a cottage industry, Mel Kiper and so forth, thought, ESPN's putting this thing on television. Who's going to watch the NFL draft? They name, make the phone call and list the names and put it on a board. Who's going to watch that? Come on. And then it turns out to be, what it is. And same thing with the NFL Combine. It's become an event.
Yeah, and you're a sports historian, as am I. I mean, like we don't have doctorates or anything in sports history, but like we both study the history of sports a lot, and we both love doing it. And one thing that comes to mind, Mark, is that the 1980s, like that just happened to be a decade in which football was ascending as a sport. I mean, it's also a decade in which the NBA did, but like football had taken the torch from baseball as the number 1 sport in the country. So like the NFL, if there had been, a Mel Kiper equivalent in like 1970 probably wouldn't have taken off, probably wouldn't have had the cultural resonance that it did. Let's keep in mind that ESPN, where you used to work, started in 1979. I mean, these things happened at particular moments in time, and you have to catch the wave connected to all the other moving parts and all the other pieces of the story. In the mid 1970s, the Super Bowl was beginning to gain traction, but it hadn't become the event just yet. The World Series was still the thing. It was the event in American sports. And like 1975 Red Sox. Like, it's no accident that series keeps getting talked about. Keep in mind that 1991 Braves Twins was on par with 1975 Red Sox as the greatest World Series of all time. But Red Sox gets talked about. You have a lot more documentaries, retrospectives, and some will say, well, it's the markets. Well, I think the Red Sox being part of it, there's something to that. But the bigger reason was that baseball was still king in 1975. And when you consider the demographics and the people who follow the various sports, baseball is the sport our parents and grandparents grew up with. That was their game. You had the cultural centrality of the World Series in the 1950s, in the 1960s, and the Super Bowl eventually muscled its way in. And I think when the Super Bowl began to be bigger than the World Series, I think the Steelers-Cowboys Super Bowls really began to take it to another level, because you had two dynasties, clash of opposites, Noel Landry, Bradshaw, Staubach. Like that, I think, was the NFL's real launching pad takeoff point. You had America's team and the Dallas Cowboy cheerleaders, and you had that Pittsburgh Steeler dynasty, the Steel Curtain. You had the mythology, right? You had NFL films developing these narratives, and you had the voice of God, John Facenda, every week coming into your living room. And so, like, that was really a mid to late 1970s when you saw the Super Bowl, exceed the World Series, and then ESPN comes in 1979. So, all way of saying that Mel Kiper and the things that you mentioned with the NFL draft and NFL player evaluation couldn't have happened in the 70s. It happened in the 80s for a reason. Like, that was the fertile ground. That was the time when, with cable television and syndicated television beginning to take off and provide more sports viewing options. Let's remember that NCAA versus Board of Oklahoma case in 1984. Like, it wouldn't have happened 10, 15 years earlier. It happened in 84 for a reason. And you just had this saturation point in the mid 1980s when the appetite for more sports coincided with the rise of football, and it created the runaway success of the NFL draft industry. Not just the NFL industry, but the draft industry, the way it did. And that has given the NFL the ability to, quote unquote, own the calendar, to have a foot in nearly every month of the year, except for a little time in the summer. That's how the NFL has been able to get its tentacles into the month of April, the month of May, here with the combine, late February, early March. March is free agency, just nearly every year. And so the NFL was able to ride that wave, catch those various forces in American sports, culture, entertainment, and media, and put it together and have the piece that it has today, where it's just the dominant force in our sports culture.
And now we're looking at an NFL combine for a USC team that's going to be highlighted, of course, by Caleb Williams and all the talk about whether he's going to be the next superstar at that position, and whether he's going to be able to translate his game to the next level. And of course, we know what the deal is in watching the NFL combine, is that by the time the week's over, it seems like nobody can play because they all get picked apart to the nth degree. But do you think this is important for Caleb Williams? And what other USC players do you think have a lot on the line this week?
Well, just to make sure everyone knows, Caleb Williams is not going to throw at the combine. He's going to throw at his pro day. And by the way, this is something that Jaden Daniels of LSU has also chosen to do. He's not going to throw, he's just going to interview. So I think frankly, Mark, I think the interview is going to be more important than Caleb Williams throwing. I will point out though, and I know that Jeff Rodriguez, who's in the chat and loyal viewer, gave us the super sticker earlier in this broadcast. I know Jeff Rodriguez is going to be the first to point out. Remember the finger injury that Caleb Williams had last year at USC, and so assuming that he's right, he's probably going to just rip it. He's probably going to crush it in terms of his throws. But I think that the interview portion is actually going to matter a lot, because there's a lot of smoke, a lot of noise about, what kind of teammate is Caleb Williams. And I'm fully on record as saying great teammate. He was with everyone at the Holiday Bowl, cheering them on. Miller Moss and Caleb Williams love and respect each other. The idea that, because Caleb Williams sat on the bench late in a game, as though sitting on a bench is itself like a critique or a commentary or a window into his soul. Get out of here. He was respected by his teammates. And, as a USC Trojan, you saw him donating like headphones and other goodies through his NIL associations to other athletes, men and women, throughout USC athletics, various other sports programs. He'd show up at basketball games. Like, this guy just wasn't about himself. This guy was making public appearances and going out of his way to make generous gestures for other USC athletes, other people in the USC community. I'll push back forcefully on the idea that Caleb Williams was a bad teammate. I think, he did certain things on the field, like not checking down, not throwing passes as quickly. And I think part of that was he wanted to make the splash play, and he could have been a little more conservative and cautious and just made the safe play a little bit more often. That doesn't make him a bad teammate. His receivers weren't getting open as easily as they did a year before with Jordan Addison. His offensive line wasn't nearly as good as it was a year ago. And yes, by holding the ball too long, he forced his offensive linemen to block longer for him. But we can't assign all of USC's problems to that. Like, the offensive line did not put him in the best situation to perform. So I'm on board with Caleb Williams being a great teammate, a winner, an elite talent. But just in terms of the analysis, I think the interview piece, with all the speculation swirling around him, that he needs to provide a very mature interview for NFL teams. He needs to leave NFL teams with the right impression to make sure that his path into the league is smoothed out really well. So that's my view of Caleb Williams. In terms of the interesting stories among the 8 USC players that are going to be at the combine, I'm focused on 2. I think that Kalen Bullock can really make a lot of money for himself, because he was coached by Alex Grinch and Dante Williams, and that did not serve him well. Like, that did not foster maximum development. Would have loved to have seen Kalen Bullock with Taylor Mays more centrally involved on the USC staff. Alas, we didn't get that. But the point being that I think that Kalen Bullock, without the negative influences that held him back on the USC coaching staff past couple years, I think now he can just show his measurables. He can show his natural instincts and the legitimately high football IQ that he has. I think he can really shoot up some draft boards with a big combine. And then the other player I'm really interested in is Taj Washington. Now, I've been doing some combine research just because, I need to fill content right now at Trojans Wire. I need to find something. And I can't do women's basketball all the time. I have to limit my Juju Watkins output. My editor, or my supervisors need me to write about football. So in terms of the combine, NFL.com has rolled out grades, pre-combine grades for basically prospects across the whole country. So I looked at the grades for USC players, and it's a scale of 5.5 on the low end, 8.0 on the high end. Taj Washington's grade, 5.91. I think that really sells him short. Now, I get it. He's small. He's not physically dominant. I get it. Like, it's pretty obvious. He's not extraordinarily fast, but there was another USC receiver who went, in my mind, far too late in the NFL draft a couple years ago. I thought he should have been picked much earlier. I thought he had much more upside, much more to offer an NFL team. He went at pick 112 in the 4th round, day 3. A lot of other guys and a lot of other mediocre wide receivers were taken in front of him. Who was that guy? Amon-Ra St. Brown. And what has he meant for the Detroit Lions? He's been huge. And I think Taj Washington, I'm not going to say he's the next Amon-Ra St. Brown, but I would say that there's a definite parallel in that when I need a guy to make a 3rd down catch, I'm going to throw to Taj Washington. And Amon-Ra St. Brown's been that guy for the Lions. I think Taj Washington can be a 3rd and 5, 3rd and 6 slot receiver who's going to make me a tough catch. He's going to find a way to get open. He's going to get open over the middle. He's going to catch the ball. He's going to take a hit. He's going to hold on to it. So the grade for Taj Washington of 5.91, there's a designation attached to each grade that NFL.com hands out. And you can read Trojan's Wire to get more details on this. You can go to the link that I attached to NFL.com. But the designation for a 5.91 grade, not at the very bottom of the scale, but close to the bottom of the scale on that 5.5 to 8.0 range, the designation is backup special teamer. I think Taj Washington can start in the NFL at wide receiver. I'm not a WR1 or 2, but he can be a reliable slot receiver who can be productive on a consistent basis, make important catches, be a really good contributor to a team at a 3rd or a 4th wide receiver slot. I think he's better than a special teamer. So this is Taj Washington's time at the NFL Combine to make some money and really improve his draft stock, because I get the sense that Taj Washington might be a 6th or 7th round pick, just in terms of the sense I'm getting. Amon-Ra went at 112. I would certainly like to think that an NFL team will is smart enough to get Taj Washington at least before the end of the 5th round, and at least before pick 150. If you need a 3rd and 5 receiver, just a possession receiver to make important catches, and you're picking in the top 150 and you don't go for Taj Washington, I think you're making a big mistake.
I think my favorite drill at the Combine is when the wide receivers run from sideline to sideline and they have to pivot their hips and catch footballs and drop them from both directions, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. It's one of my favorites. All right, folks, we do appreciate you being here. I just dropped the link, and unfortunately, I don't know why it's not allowing me to post clickable links. But anyway, all of Matt's information there at Trojan's Wire just posted there in the chat. So you can just grab that and you can copy it and just take that directly to Trojan's Wire. So join Matt right there.
Okay, Slap Happy always wants his Juju update, and that's not Watkins. He's interested in Julian Juju Lewis. Buffalo's Wire, Slap Happy, said that Juju Lewis is making another visit to Dion at Colorado. So that's what I have for you. I'm not reading anything into it. I'm passing along the report from my colleagues at Buffalo's Wire. That's your Juju update.
Folks, we talk college football here at the Voice of College Football all the time. This never stops, 365. So on Tuesday, we've got Iowa Live. That's at 5:30 Eastern. We've got Nebraska Live at 7 Eastern. The Michigan show's at 8 Eastern time. So get ready for another big day here at the Voice of College Football. Again, track Matt's work there at Trojan's Wire with Tim as well. Make it on back next Monday. Remember, the new time is at 10 Eastern, 7 Pacific. Matt, we always appreciate you making this work for us each and every week, sir.
Thanks so much, Mark. Have a great week, everybody.